Ethan Cole wasn't famous, not in the conventional sense. He didn't walk red carpets or give TED Talks. But in the tight-knit and often shadowy world of high-level cryptocurrency, he was something of a legend. A self-made millionaire by 30, Ethan had built his fortune through aggressive DeFi investments and early positions in obscure altcoins that later exploded in value. By 32, he was wealthy enough to disappear from public life. And that's exactly what he did. He moved into the top-floor penthouse of a high-security residential tower in Midtown Manhattan, Unit 73A, a luxury apartment that boasted biometric access, bulletproof windows, and a state-of-the-art smart home system with AI-controlled security. He lived alone, rarely seen. And according to the few people who still had contact with him, he preferred it that way. April 14, 2022, was the last confirmed sighting of Ethan Cole. At 2:47 p.m., a food delivery was dropped off outside his unit. The hallway camera captured the delivery man waiting the required 30 seconds before walking away. The bag was still sitting there the next morning, untouched, and inside the apartment, nothing. No movement, no signs of life. Just silence. When Ethan failed to check in for a scheduled Zoom call with his financial compliance advisor 2 days later, it wasn't alarming. He'd missed meetings before. He was known to go completely dark for days at a time, often when deep in a new project. But when he didn't respond to multiple calls and messages from his lawyer, his mother, and the building's front desk over the next 48 hours, concern started to mount. On April 17th, a wellness check was officially requested. The NYPD arrived just after noon. The building manager used the emergency override to access the penthouse. From the moment officers stepped inside, something felt wrong. The air was stale. The apartment was spotless. No signs of struggle, no broken locks, no blood. Just untouched. Ethan's phone was found face down on the kitchen counter, still cracked from a past fall. His laptop was open on the coffee table, its screen black. There was a half-finished glass of wine in the sink, and a plate with what looked like remnants of a small meal, maybe fruit and cheese. Nothing spoiled, nothing fresh. Forensics swept the apartment, no fingerprints except Ethan's, no forced entry, nothing stolen, nothing moved. The biometric log confirmed what the smart system already showed. Ethan had entered the unit at 9:06 p.m. on April 14th. After that, there were no exits, not by stairs, not by elevator, no window alarms triggered, no service entrances used. It was as if he had simply vanished from the inside. More disturbing was the fact that every security feature had functioned normally. No errors, no gaps. The door's biometric scanner had registered only one user in the last 30 days. Cole. Even the air conditioning system, which could detect room occupancy through carbon dioxide fluctuation, suggested the apartment had been empty since the night he went missing. But Ethan was not a man who could be dismissed easily. His business holdings were extensive. His digital assets alone were worth an estimated $27 million at the time of his disappearance. Yet, all of it, every wallet, every cold storage drive, every access key, remained untouched, as if whatever happened to him wasn't about money. There was, however, one detail that caught investigators' attention early on. On the far wall of the master bedroom, hidden behind a minimalist painting, was a custom-installed wall safe. Not a standard model. This one had been embedded directly into the concrete during the apartment's remodeling, reinforced with steel plating and secured with a dual biometric and code lock, designed by Ethan himself. The safe was sealed shut when police discovered it. With no warrant and no legal reason to open it, they left it undisturbed. It would remain closed for the next 3 years. In the days that followed, detectives combed through Ethan's digital life. He was active in several encrypted crypto forums, often under pseudonyms. A few close contacts said he'd grown increasingly paranoid in the months leading up to his disappearance. He had begun talking about surveillance, about data leaks, about backdoors in blockchain code. He told one friend over Signal that he was being watched, not by the government, but by someone he couldn't explain. But none of it came together into anything actionable. There were no signs of foul play, No ransom notes, no evidence of suicide, just a perfect vacuum of presence. Friends were questioned. The building's security team was grilled. Maintenance logs were reviewed. No one had seen or heard anything unusual. And so, the case stalled. The media picked it up briefly. Crypto millionaire vanishes from 73rd floor made a few headlines. But without new evidence, the buzz died down. Speculation flared on Reddit and YouTube. Some believed Ethan had faked his death and escaped overseas. Others were convinced he was assassinated for access codes to a private coin project. A few claimed it was a mental break, that he had isolated himself so deeply he found a way to vanish without leaving a single trace behind. But in the apartment, sealed and untouched, the safe remained. Cold, silent, locked, and 3 years later, it would open, from the inside. At first, no one thought much of the live stream. It was buried among dozens of others on Ethan's Twitch channel, streams where he'd talk about crypto volatility, on-chain governance, cold wallets, and obscure projects he called sleepers. His content wasn't flashy. He didn't show his face, just a voice, a screen share, and the occasional glimpse of his penthouse in the reflection of a turned-off monitor. But in the days after his disappearance, one viewer dug deeper, and what they found in Ethan's final stream would become one of the strangest, most dissected pieces of digital evidence in the case. The stream aired on April 13, 2022, just 1 day before Ethan was last seen. It ran for 41 minutes and 12 seconds. Most of it was routine. Ethan analyzing market trends, criticizing a competing blockchain security model, and warning viewers not to keep coins on centralized exchanges. But then, just after the 29-minute mark, something shifted. He stopped mid-sentence. The chart on the screen froze, and for a moment, there was complete silence. Then Ethan said, in a low, strained voice, "Something's not right. I think someone's in my code." At first, viewers assumed he was speaking metaphorically, referencing a network exploit or smart contract flaw. But he didn't clarify. Instead, he went quiet again. Typing sounds echoed through his mic. A mouse is clicking rapidly. Then he muttered, "It's not external. It's not a breach. Someone's already inside." The stream chat, small but loyal, lit up with questions. What did he mean? Was he being hacked? Was this part of a security demo? But Ethan didn't respond. He leaned out of frame, and for a moment, the only sound was the hum of his apartment. Then came the whisper. It was faint, almost inaudible, but unmistakable. A soft voice, somewhere close to the mic, saying just 5 words. "It's already inside with you." Ethan flinched. He stared directly at the screen, eyes wide, just a brief glimpse of his face reflected in the dark monitor. He reached toward the camera, fumbled, and then the stream abruptly ended. At the time, it didn't make headlines. A few followers clipped the moment, posted it on forums, and called it creepy. But without context, it faded into the background. It wasn't until after Ethan's disappearance that investigators were alerted to the stream by an anonymous Reddit user claiming to be a former viewer. They passed along the clip. Investigators downloaded the original VOD from Twitch servers under a preservation request. It became the most closely examined piece of digital evidence in the case. Audio technicians enhanced the whisper repeatedly. Forensic analysts tried to isolate the frequency, but the results were inconclusive. The waveform showed no clear spatial source, no obvious location within the room. Some argued it was an audio glitch. Others insisted it was a voice, one that didn't match Ethan's. A few pointed out that the waveform had a reverberation pattern inconsistent with typical room acoustics, suggesting proximity to the microphone, but not echoing off the walls. The sound was too clean, too close. Ethan's friends were interviewed again. They were asked whether he had ever spoken about hearing voices, seeing things, or suffering from paranoia. Most said no. But one friend, a fellow crypto developer named Marcus, recalled a conversation from weeks earlier that suddenly made more sense. Marcus said Ethan had called him late one night, rambling about layers of reality and encryption that wasn't digital. At the time, Marcus chalked it up to stress. Ethan was working on a major back-end overhaul of a proprietary blockchain protocol. He hadn't been sleeping, hadn't been social. But now, the call felt different. There had been something in Ethan's voice, fear, not of failure, of intrusion. Investigators also pulled metadata from Ethan's local machine. Logs showed that during the stream, multiple background scripts were running. Some Ethan had written himself, others from open-source packages. But nothing indicated a hack or malware. His system hadn't been breached. There were no outbound connections, no anomalies in his network logs. Just one brief line of terminal input typed by Ethan himself at 10:48 p.m. Run vault check integrity, deep scan. That command, according to tech analysts, wasn't standard. It wasn't part of any known software library. It matched no public repositories. But it suggested he was testing something he called Vault. The whisper, the command, the look in Ethan's eyes, none of it could be explained. Theories exploded online. Some believed Ethan was playing a game, part of an elaborate viral campaign or alternate reality project. Others believed he'd suffered a psychotic break, that the whisper was a hallucination or psychosis, a mind fraying under pressure. But there was something else. A private Discord message Ethan had sent to a server mod just hours before the stream began. It read, "If anything ever happens to me, check the logs from this stream. It's not all in the code." The message was time-stamped April 13th at 4:11 p.m., less than 6 hours before he went live. It was the last message he would ever send. The case, once purely about a missing man, was now entwined with something deeper, possibly psychological, possibly fabricated, or possibly something no one had the tools to name. Whatever it was, the answer wasn't on the blockchain, or in the safe, or on any hard drive. But something had spoken that night, and it was already inside. In missing persons investigations, digital footprints are often the loudest clues. People don't just vanish. They leave behind location data, web activity, text messages, and financial transactions. And in Ethan Cole's case, someone whose entire world operated online, his disappearance should have left a blizzard of digital residue. But what investigators found was something far stranger. Not a slow fade, but an abrupt, surgical erasure. Detectives brought in a digital forensics consultant on the third day of the investigation. By then, Ethan's apartment had been swept and sealed, and the physical scene had already raised more questions than answers. But Ethan's tech infrastructure was the real prize. His custom desktop rig alone was worth more than most people's cars, built from military-grade components, housed in a shielded chassis, and connected to multiple offline storage drives. It was the heart of his operation, and likely the last system he touched before he vanished. At first glance, the machine looked dormant, powered off, no error indicators. But when booted, it opened into an encrypted OS partition with a dead-end login screen. No password worked, not even boot-level admin overrides. The main drive had been locked with multi-layer encryption. It took 2 days of forensic imaging just to copy the file structure, but what stood out wasn't what was there. It was what wasn't. Ethan's activity stopped at exactly 11:07 p.m. on April 14, 2022. His last recorded keyboard input, his last mouse click, his last network ping, all within 6 seconds. His browser closed, his remote wallet client disconnected, his password vault auto-locked. There were no shutdown procedures, no sign of malware, and no trace of external tampering. It was as if the machine, and Ethan, simply ceased to exist in digital time. But one anomaly survived. On one of the external SSDs recovered from a drawer in his workspace, a technician located remnants of a deleted partition. It had been wiped recently, roughly 72 hours before the disappearance. The cleaning method wasn't thorough. Some residual metadata remained, enough to identify the volume label, Vault Room 0. The name didn't match any known OS environments, software plugins, or security tools. It wasn't listed in the tech stack Ethan was known to use. It had no fingerprint in public or private databases, and according to experts, even its formatting suggested it wasn't designed for conventional file storage. It had one file extension that survived deletion, *eth keylog. The file name wasn't standard, but when opened in a hex viewer, the file displayed a strange, repeating string of alphanumeric code. Investigators thought it might be a blockchain address at first, but it wasn't valid on Ethereum, Solana, or any known chain. Cyber analysts tried running it through decryption models, brute force dictionaries, and AI pattern recognition. No match. The sequence appeared randomly generated until someone noticed that every eighth character was a repeating digit, 0, then 1, then 2. It looked more like a key to something physical, like a combination. This small discovery, quiet and easily overlooked, was enough for law enforcement to begin considering a different angle. Not fraud, not murder, but containment. Something is deliberately locked, something Ethan was trying to hide or protect. Investigators re-examined his digital infrastructure for any other references to the word vault room. They found only one, in a forgotten metadata tag on a version-controlled text file dated 2 years earlier. The file was titled failsafe.md and was stored inside a hidden folder within his backup server. The file itself was empty, but its properties included one unusual flag, linked, biometric fallback. True, it wasn't a flag used by standard encryption systems, which meant Ethan had likely built it himself. When forensic teams contacted Ethan's old collaborators, former business partners from his early days working on decentralized access protocols, they confirmed Ethan had been experimenting with hybrid security, systems that blurred the line between physical presence and digital authorization. One colleague recalled him being obsessed with the idea that no one should be able to access a vault unless they're inside it. At the time, it sounded like abstract paranoia. Now, it felt closer to a roadmap. And yet, despite all of this, despite the tech, the paranoia, the clues, none of Ethan's financial assets had moved. His multi-signature crypto wallet, which held nearly $27 million in various currencies, had not registered a single transaction since April 14th. The private keys were assumed to be stored offline, likely on a cold wallet device or encrypted vault, possibly inside the apartment, possibly inside that sealed wall safe. But if so, they were still locked away, just like everything else. The working theory among some investigators began to shift. Ethan hadn't been taken. He hadn't been killed. He'd sealed himself in, locked away whatever he was building. But why? His family grew frustrated with the lack of answers. His mother, now fully convinced Ethan had suffered a psychological breakdown, demanded the NYPD force open the wall safe. But without probable cause or signs of a crime, the court denied the warrant. Ethan was still technically a missing person, not a victim, and the safe remained sealed. The deeper the police dug, the less they understood. Ethan hadn't run. He hadn't been hacked. His world hadn't unraveled. It had been shut down, deliberately, precisely, one system at a time, and at the center of it all was a single name that no one could explain. Vault Room 0. And it hadn't been accessed since the night Ethan vanished. The tower Ethan lived in wasn't just exclusive, it was engineered to be impenetrable. 73 floors of reinforced steel and glass, private elevator access, facial recognition scanners, and a 24-hour security team stationed on site. It catered to high-profile clients, international financiers, crypto elites, and reclusive celebrities. Ethan Cole wasn't the most famous name in the building, but he was arguably the most private. And for 3 full years after his disappearance, that privacy became the central obstacle in understanding how a man could vanish into thin air without ever leaving. After investigators hit a wall with his digital life, they shifted focus back to the physical. Security logs were pulled for the entire building: elevator movements, door access timestamps, visitor sign-ins, and maintenance checklists. The period they reviewed spanned from April 11th to April 18th, 2022, casting a wide net to cover the lead-up to and aftermath of Ethan's disappearance. What they found was silence. According to the elevator system's internal logging data, Ethan's penthouse floor had no recorded stops from April 12th through April 17th, except for Ethan's biometric tag. There were no guest entries, no service access logs, and no anomalies in power usage or temperature variance that would suggest unexpected activity. Even the service elevator, which could only be accessed via a master override key held in a locked cabinet at the concierge desk, showed no use during that window. Security footage confirmed this. The hallway outside Ethan's apartment showed one food delivery on the afternoon of April 14th, the same one that was still sitting untouched when police arrived days later. The delivery man knocked, waited 30 seconds, and left. Beyond that moment, the footage is haunting in its emptiness. No movement, no flickering lights, just hours and hours of stillness. The building's front desk staff were questioned individually. No one remembered seeing Ethan during that time. A few said that wasn't unusual. He rarely came downstairs and used the building's private underground parking garage when he left, typically at night. But the garage logs didn't show his car exiting after April 12th. His vehicle, a matte black Audi RS7, was still parked in its reserved space when police launched the investigation. Inside the apartment, nothing suggested disorder. There were no signs of forced entry. The biometric smart lock had been engaged from the inside. It was a top-of-the-line model, a multi-authentication system requiring both fingerprint and retinal scan. According to the system's memory chip, Ethan was the only active user. No failed attempts, no resets, no overrides. The apartment itself felt like it had been paused. A dinner plate with a fork resting on its edge sat in the kitchen sink. Nearby, a wine glass, half full, slightly smudged. Forensics later confirmed it held traces of Ethan's fingerprints and DNA. It was red wine, organic, imported from a boutique vineyard in Oregon. A bottle of it, still mostly full, was found on the counter. The cork was left beside it, placed gently on a coaster like he intended to return to it later. The living room was clean but lived in. A laptop, powered down. A hoodie draped over the back of a leather chair. A pair of wireless earbuds is still charging in their dock. On the kitchen counter, his phone, screen face down, casing cracked on one corner. Forensics found no recent calls, no text messages beyond a few spam notifications. His last activity was checking a calendar alert for a portfolio audit. That was April 14th, 10:56 p.m. Detectives were meticulous. They scanned for signs of panic, of conflict, of departure. But Ethan had left nothing. No goodbye note, no packed bags, no anomalies in bank accounts, utilities, or medical records. His fridge still contained fresh groceries. In the freezer, sealed vacuum packs of prepped meals labeled with dates extending into the following week. It looked like a man who was planning to stay. One detective likened the scene to a hotel room that had just been turned over, perfectly arranged, completely sterile, yet unmistakably occupied just moments before. And the unsettling part, what no one could reconcile, was that every layer of protection Ethan had surrounded himself with had held. No sign of intrusion, no breach, and most damning of all, no exit. That floor, the 73rd, had only one residential unit, Ethan's. The rest of the floor was mechanical. Housing ventilation systems, electrical panels, and an emergency stairwell with a steel door requiring dual-key access from both inside and out. The stairwell, when checked, showed no recent use. A fine layer of dust was undisturbed. No fingerprints, no footprints. Investigators began to theorize. Could he have faked his disappearance, escaped through some unknown exit, a hidden panel, a built-in secret passage? But the architectural plans were clear. There were no such structures, and even if he had found some way out, the building's perimeter was monitored by cameras from every angle. The footage, analyzed frame by frame, showed no suspicious movement for days. Friends, when told about the state of the apartment, were unnerved. One mentioned that Ethan had become fixated on control in recent months, that his environment was his last sanctuary. But if that were true, it made what happened even harder to grasp. Because the only logical conclusion left, the one that no one wanted to say out loud, was that Ethan Cole had either never left that room or had found a way to disappear without using a door. and across the room, bolted into the bedroom wall, that silent steel safe remained, unopened, undisturbed, almost as if it were waiting. 6 months before Ethan Cole vanished, his lease agreement was quietly amended. It was a routine update, filed electronically through the property's management system and time-stamped October 12, 2021. The edit added a new resident to Unit 73A, a woman named Leah Rayner. No date of birth, no social security number, just a name, an e-signature, and a checkbox marked resident occupant, non-owner. The detail wasn't noticed at first. It wasn't flagged in early reviews of the lease or the original missing persons file. But it surfaced weeks later when a junior detective was cross-checking building access logs. The biometric system had only ever registered Ethan, but the management software listed 2 residents. It didn't make sense. And when they went looking for Leah Rayner, she was nowhere to be found. They started with the basics. No driver's license, no DMV registration in any state, no utility accounts, no credit history, no tax ID, no school records, employment history, or medical files. The email address tied to her signature, lia.rayner@protonmail.com, had been deleted. The phone number, a prepaid VoIP line, was disconnected and untraceable. It was as if the woman never existed. Investigators began to ask questions. Had Ethan brought someone into his home quietly? A girlfriend? A developer he was working with? Someone under the radar? They returned to the building, this time with specific inquiries. The daytime concierge, who had worked the desk for over 5 years, didn't recall anyone by that name. But the overnight doorman paused. He remembered someone. He didn't know the name, but he remembered a woman visiting the Penthouse multiple times in the fall of 2021. Early mornings, late nights, always alone. Slim, dark hair, wore a hooded coat even indoors. Didn't speak much. When pressed, he said she might have had an accent. Quiet, maybe Eastern European, was the closest he could get. Detectives brought in a sketch artist. Using the doorman's vague recollections, they produced a composite image, a soft-featured woman with narrow eyes and high cheekbones. The image was circulated through law enforcement databases, online forums, and facial recognition software. There were no matches, not locally, not nationally, not even overseas. It didn't trigger a single result. The FBI's cyber unit was brought in briefly to investigate the lease amendment itself. They confirmed that the signature appeared legitimate and that the document had not been tampered with. Whoever added Leah Rayner to the lease had the correct credentials. The IP address used for the submission matched Ethan's home network. There was no evidence of coercion or unauthorized access, but the question remained: why list her at all? Friends were asked again if Ethan had ever mentioned anyone by that name. Most said no. One recalled that during a group chat about private network testing, Ethan once referenced a live-in node tester, but everyone assumed he was joking. Another friend remembered a vague tweet Ethan had posted and later deleted. True isolation isn't digital, it's biological. At the time, it sounded philosophical. Now, it felt like a clue no one had understood. Investigators began to build psychological profiles. If Leah were real, why was there no trace of her? Was she part of some experiment? An alias? Could she have been fabricated by Ethan for legal or technical reasons? Or worse, could she have been someone he trusted who had since disappeared herself? Some detectives started considering that Leah wasn't a person in the traditional sense. Maybe she was a ghost identity, used to mask a device or program Ethan had created. But that theory fell apart when the building's motion sensors were reviewed again. They showed multiple instances between October and December 2021 of secondary movement within the apartment, activity not tied to Ethan's biometric tag. It was small, but it was there. Someone else had been in that penthouse, and then it stopped. The last motion detection event not linked to Ethan occurred on December 2nd at 3:14 a.m. After that, only Ethan, no additional presence, no unexplained triggers, just him, alone, until he vanished. The working theory began to fracture. Some investigators now believed that Leah Rayner had lived there, briefly, secretly, and possibly under duress. Others thought she was a collaborator, someone embedded in Ethan's project who later went off-grid. But the most unnerving possibility was that Ethan hadn't disappeared alone, that someone else had been there, someone whose identity had been wiped so thoroughly it left no trace behind except a name on a lease and a vague memory from a doorman half asleep on the night shift. Ethan's mother was informed of the discovery. She was stunned. She had never met or heard of Leah. In their last conversation, just 3 days before he vanished, Ethan had seemed distant, but not unwell. He'd talked about refining something, a process he called pure isolation protocol, and then quickly changed the subject. She pressed him about his loneliness. He laughed it off, told her he wasn't alone anymore. That sentence hit differently now. The case, already strange, had deepened. A name with no history, a person with no footprint, a presence that was there, until it wasn't. And behind all of it, the same unanswered question kept coming back. Who was Leah Rayner? And more importantly, where did she go? By the time investigators reached Ethan's cloud storage, weeks had passed since his disappearance. Most of his files were encrypted, heavily compartmentalized, or purged. He had used a hybrid backup system, cloud storage for low-priority material, cold storage drives for the rest. The cloud itself looked clean. Boring even. No traces of financial data, no proprietary code, no notes on his research, just a few invoices, PDF contracts, and travel receipts. But buried inside a nested directory, hidden beneath layers of benign folders labeled with generic terms like Tax Archive and Photos Backup 2020, a tech analyst found a single zip file. It was titled Obsidian. It wasn't password protected, but the contents were strange. Inside the archive were 7 audio files, each one dated, each named only by a timestamp, no transcription, no metadata tags, just raw voice memos, recordings Ethan had made himself, seemingly in isolation. They ranged from 30 seconds to almost 9 minutes, and as investigators listened, a portrait began to emerge, one of a man drifting away from reality, consumed by an idea he couldn't let go of. The first recording was dated 3 months before his disappearance. In it, Ethan sounds measured, even clinical. He talks about redundancy and blockchain security models, about the limits of traditional air-gapped storage. Then he introduces something new, a system he refers to as Vault Zero. He calls it a complete cold vault, not just digitally isolated, but physically separated from every form of external access. A place, he says, where proof of presence is the only key. In later entries, the tone begins to shift. He references experiments in biometric fallback authentication, mentioning heartbeat patterns, eye dilation, and dermal conductivity as possible unique identifiers. He talks about presence not just as a login credential, but as a requirement. If I'm not there, he says in one entry, it won't open. If someone tries to force it, it locks permanently, like Schrödinger's box, but real. Another file is quieter. Ethan sounds tired, maybe even afraid. He mentions errors in the system, something about the biometric model rejecting false positives, even ones that look like him. It knows the difference, he says, even between me and a recording of me. It knows when I'm lying to it. The 5th memo is where things become harder to interpret. Ethan begins to describe a sensation, not technical, but personal, a feeling that he wasn't alone in the apartment. He says the system may have become aware too early, though it's unclear what he means. I didn't build it to listen, he whispers, but it started anyway. I think it heard me thinking. Then he goes silent for almost a full minute before ending the file with a single word. Test. The 6th recording is shorter, just over 2 minutes. In it, Ethan says he's close to finalizing what he calls the core chamber. He says it will be self-contained, oxygen-regulated, and resistant to outside interference. He says there will be no remote access, no signal in or out. Pure isolation, he mutters. The only way to test if presence is proof is to be the proof. The final audio file is dated April 13th, the night before Ethan was last seen. His voice is quiet. controlled. But beneath it, there's something else, an edge of resignation. He says the system is live now, fully autonomous, that the biometric fallback has been configured. He doesn't mention where the vault is or how it's accessed, only that the test begins at 0 hour. Then, at the very end, his voice drops lower, and he speaks slowly, almost like he's trying to make someone, or something, understand. If I disappear, he says, the vault is the clue, but it only opens if I'm in. That sentence stopped investigators cold. At first, they thought it was metaphorical, maybe a code, a reference to some deeper encryption scheme. But over time, it began to feel more literal. If the vault, wherever it was, could only be opened by Ethan, and only if he was inside, what did that mean for where he went? Had he sealed himself into something, voluntarily? Was it an experiment gone wrong, a mental break masked as a technical challenge? The files added a new layer to the already disjointed narrative. Ethan wasn't just working on another cryptocurrency protocol. He wasn't designing storage. He was building something physical, a space, a container, and not just to hold assets, but to hold himself. There were no schematics, no hardware logs, no location data tied to the Obsidian folder. It was as if he had spoken everything out loud but refused to write it down. The only artifact, those voice memos, felt like a confession he never intended to share. Ethan's family listened to the recordings. His mother broke down halfway through the fourth one. His sister said it sounded like he was descending into something he didn't know how to stop. His former business partner called it a controlled collapse, the slow, methodical breakdown of a man trying to outrun fear by turning it into code. And yet, no one could shake the feeling that Ethan had left those files intentionally, that he had buried them just deep enough to be found, eventually, as if part of him knew that whatever he'd built, whatever he'd done, wasn't going to end the way he hoped, and the vault, whatever it was, remained sealed, somewhere, waiting. For 3 years there was nothing, no new leads, no credible sightings, no financial movement. Ethan Harrow had vanished with the kind of finality that doesn't leave room for rescue, just interpretation. His friends accepted it slowly, in fragments. Some convinced themselves he'd taken his own life, unable to shoulder the pressure of a failing startup and mounting paranoia. Others believed he staged it, maybe even escaped. There were theories online, elaborate ones, claims that Ethan was targeted by rival crypto cartels or that he'd faked his disappearance to vanish into a private island funded by the millions he never withdrew. Reddit threads dissected his last Twitch stream frame by frame, combing for clues in every whisper, every flicker of shadow. But after a while, even those forums grew quiet. The mystery had gone cold. Time moved on. His family held a memorial in late 2023, a closed casket service, even though there was no body. His mother insisted on one anyway. She said the absence needed a place to rest. His father didn't speak at the service. His sister, Leah, read a short poem, not something she wrote, just one she'd found on a forum about ambiguous loss. No one mentioned the vault. No one brought up the biometric experiments. It was as if Ethan had split into two people, the brother, son, and friend they remembered, and the other version, the one obsessed with presence, proof, and control. That Ethan felt more like a theory than a man. The apartment was sold back to the building's management in early 2024. The smart lock system was stripped out, the walls were repainted, new hardwood floors were installed to cover where investigators had once pried up the baseboards, searching for hidden compartments. No buyer stayed longer than 6 months. Not because of anything specific, just a feeling, some said. Like the place had a tension in it, not haunted, just waiting. In August 2025, the building sent in a contracted engineer to inspect the unit's wiring. New owners were scheduled to move in by the end of the month. The inspection was routine. Check breaker connections, test the smart panel, log heat signatures for insurance records. The engineer, Marcus Delo, had done dozens of these jobs. He wasn't expecting anything unusual. The apartment looked like every other luxury penthouse, sleek, impersonal, just the bare bones of high-end renovation. But while scanning a north-facing interior wall, Dello picked up something strange. A difference in thermal signature about chest height, just left of where the old refrigerator had once stood. At first, he assumed it was insulation variance or a misplaced HVAC conduit. But when he pressed lightly against the drywall, he heard something. Not an echo, something mechanical, a click, not loud but distinct, deliberate, like a latch disengaging. Dello stepped back, waited. No other sound followed. He called security. Building management arrived within the hour. They removed a section of drywall, exposing what had once been completely sealed in solid concrete. Behind the insulation, centered in the framing studs, was a rectangular cavity, a vault, small, no more than 16 inches wide. The interior was padded, lined with matte steel, and empty. There were no scratches around the edges, no signs of tampering or forced entry. The hinges were intact, and the locking mechanism, biometric and magnetic, had disengaged. From the inside, the police were called immediately. Forensics scanned the vault and surrounding wall for prints, fibers, anything. They found nothing conclusive, just a residual layer of condensation along the inner seam, as if the interior had been sealed for a long time, and something had recently changed. The vault hadn't been listed in any blueprint, not in the original construction plans, not in the developer's post-build documentation. It had been added manually, post-renovation, embedded behind 3 inches of reinforced concrete. Whoever installed it had done so with precision and secrecy. Investigators reopened Ethan's file. They pulled the voice memos again, re-examined the line. "It only opens if I'm in." At the time, it had sounded like a metaphor, a technical brag. But now it didn't feel like that. It felt like instruction. They searched the vault for biometric residue. Trace analysis revealed partial dermal oil consistent with human contact, too degraded for DNA confirmation, but recent, as if someone had activated the interior latch. But there was nothing else. No storage, no hidden compartment, just a space large enough to hold a person, maybe seated, maybe curled in on themselves. The dimensions were claustrophobic, too small for long-term concealment. There was no ventilation, no power, no drain. Just a dead space in the wall, sealed, waiting, and now open. Questions flooded back. Was this Ethan's vault? Had he built it as part of the Obsidian project? Was this the cold proof of presence chamber he'd described in his memos? And if so, what triggered it to unlock after all? This time? Speculation reignited online. Some believed he'd hidden himself there and died, his remains somehow removed before discovery. Others believed the vault had been part of a larger mechanism, a signal or key that was never meant to be found. But one theory, whispered in tech circles and deep web forums, spread fastest. The vault had been programmed to wait 3 years, a timer. And when the final interval ended, it opened, not because someone was inside, but because someone, somewhere, had stopped being present. No trace of Ethan was ever recovered from the vault. No hair, no blood, no bone. But the presence of the vault changed everything. It wasn't a rumor anymore. It was real. A final artifact. The only clue left behind by a man who believed that proof wasn't just data, it was existence itself. And now, whatever had been inside that wall was gone. Behind the wall safe, concealed behind years of drywall, concrete, and silence, was something no one had anticipated. Investigators, now back in the penthouse for the first time in over 3 years, pulled away insulation until they exposed a rectangular steel seam running along the far end of the cavity. What they found was not just a safe. It was a door, flush with the wall, without any visible locking mechanism from the outside. It had opened only because the vault door had opened first, and when they pried it wider, they discovered the true secret Ethan Harrow had left behind. A hidden microchamber, roughly 7 feet long by 5 feet wide, completely encased in soundproof steel. The floor was padded with what looked like gym matting, worn in spots. On one side, a sealed oxygen tank with its regulator detached, a pile of empty water bottles, a biometric fingerprint pad mounted next to a small LED panel, now dark, and in the far corner, a single molar, human, still bloodied at the root as if torn or broken out with force. The forensic team moved carefully. They cataloged every item, swabbed every surface. The chamber had no external access, no handle, no keypad, nothing that allowed it to be opened from the outside. Once closed, it was completely isolated, airlocked, lightproof, soundproof, a space designed to be invisible, to keep something in or out. The fingerprints inside the chamber matched only one person, Ethan Harrow. And when DNA testing came back on the tooth 2 weeks later, it confirmed what investigators already suspected. The tooth was his. No other DNA was found, no evidence of a second person, no rope, no blood spatter, no signs of violence beyond the molar. There were no scratches on the walls, no notes, no scribbled timelines. The biometric pad had registered 3 successful entries, likely tests, and 1 final lockout, time-stamped the evening of his disappearance. From that point forward, it had never been accessed again. Police were forced to ask a question no one wanted to answer out loud. Had Ethan Harrow voluntarily sealed himself inside? There was no immediate explanation. Ethan had always been a digital purist, obsessed with cryptographic certainty. He talked about the need for trustless spaces, environments where systems couldn't be faked, manipulated, or spoofed. In his voice memos, he'd once described presence as a provable state, something only validated by absolute context. If you're in, then you're in. If you're not, nothing can simulate it. But few believed he would have taken that philosophy this far. The oxygen tank was industrial grade, meant to last about 30 hours, maybe longer with slow, controlled breathing. There was no backup, no food, no waste system. Whoever went in wasn't planning to stay long, or wasn't planning to come out. The psychological profile added another layer. Ethan wasn't exhibiting clear suicidal behaviors, at least not publicly, but his family had reported signs of increased isolation in the months leading up to his disappearance. He'd grown paranoid, kept his laptop in a Faraday bag, removed all smart devices from his apartment except the biometric door lock, which he manually recoded every 2 weeks. He'd made cryptic statements to friends about disappearing without leaving and about testing presence in physical architecture. None of it had made sense, not then, but now, viewed through the lens of that tiny steel chamber, everything looked different. Was it an experiment? A test of his cold storage system? A final proof of concept? Some believed Ethan had intended to enter the chamber, trigger the biometric pad, and wait for a timed release, expecting to be retrieved or monitored externally. But there was no external control panel, no timer, no fail-safe. Others believed it was a panic room, a place to hide from someone or something believed to be coming for him. But again, there was no emergency system, no phone, no communication device, just isolation. And then some believed it was a prison, a trap built by Ethan for Ethan. The idea wasn't just paranoia, it stemmed from his final voice memo discovered months earlier. If I disappear, the vault is the clue, but it only opens if I'm in. That line, once thought to be metaphorical, now reads like a warning. A technical trigger tied directly to his physical presence. The vault couldn't be opened unless Ethan was inside the safe room. So what if he'd designed it that way on purpose? Some theorized it was a dead man's switch, a legacy vault designed to stay sealed unless he was present, alive, and verified. If he died or was forcibly removed, the system stayed shut forever. But something had failed. Or maybe it had worked exactly as he intended. There was nobody in the chamber, no sign of decomposition, no blood beyond the tooth, nothing that explained how, or if, he'd ever truly died inside that room, which left investigators with a final chilling reality. Ethan had entered the chamber, sealed himself in, and somehow, at some point, the room had opened again from the inside. How? When? By whom? The biometric log offered no clues. The last entry was from August 1st, 2025, the same day the wall safe had been discovered. But that timestamp hadn't been uploaded from a server. It had been logged internally, suggesting the system came back online for the first time in 3 years, performed a check, and then disengaged. A single final access. From within. Whether Ethan was alive in that moment or someone else had his prints remains unknown. But after 3 years of silence, the vault had finally spoken. And what it revealed wasn't an answer. It was a question wrapped in steel. Because if Ethan built that room to hide from the world, then someone, or something, had let him out. 3 years after Ethan Harrow vanished, the investigation had all but dried up. Leads had gone cold. The safe room discovery had stirred speculation, but no concrete answers. Then, almost by accident, another piece emerged, small, easily missed, and nearly forgotten. It came from an old sports car Ethan had leased during his final year, parked in a long-term storage facility outside the city. The car had sat untouched, accumulating dust and monthly fees, until a financial executor arranged for its sale. A routine sweep by a technician, meant only to check for personal items, turned up something strange wedged deep inside the glove box lining. It was a small, unmarked USB drive, wrapped in black gaffer tape and sealed in a static-proof sleeve. The plastic was discolored, the contacts worn. It had been hidden deliberately, but not securely, not encrypted at the hardware level, not meant to disappear, just delayed. The drive was turned over to authorities, and its contents sent to digital forensics. Inside was a single folder, locked behind dual-layer encryption that matched Ethan's known cryptographic keys. Once cracked, it revealed nearly 6 hours of audio recordings. The metadata was consistent with ambient capture, not traditional voice memos, low bit rate, continuous sampling. Experts realized quickly what they were hearing wasn't from a phone or recorder. It was from something smaller, something internal. Ethan had implanted a subdermal microphone. The model was traced back to a short-lived medical prototype, originally designed for patients with degenerative speech disorders. It could be activated silently with a muscular twitch and run on a low-power battery charged inductively through the skin. The company had discontinued the product after security concerns emerged over untraceable recordings. But someone like Ethan would have seen that not as a flaw, but a feature. The recording spanned a final stretch of weeks before his disappearance. Most of them were quiet. Ethan walking, typing, breathing, muffled ambient sounds, city noise, elevator hums, footsteps across hardwood floors. A handful of files captured brief whispered commentary, disjointed, paranoid, fragmented. At first, they offered little value. He mentioned code revisions, biometric override thresholds, and cryptographic failures. He referenced terms no one could place: red channel, Leah's echo, obsidian layer. None of it made sense outside his mind. But then came the final file. It was shorter than the rest. 23 seconds. The waveform spiked in the middle. Ethan's whisper. Hoarse, strained, but deliberate. He said, "She said I built the cage for myself, but I swear I heard her breathing on the other side." And then silence. The room listening to that playback went still. No one moved. The phrase wasn't just eerie, it was loaded. Investigators had long debated whether Leah Rayner, the mysterious roommate who left no trace, was a hallucination, a partner, or something else entirely. Her disappearance had mirrored Ethan's, inexplicable, undocumented, redacted. The building doorman remembered her only vaguely. Quiet, maybe Eastern European. No one else ever confirmed her existence, but Ethan had whispered those words not to himself, not absent-mindedly, but into the void. A record meant for no one. A last breadcrumb. She said I built the cage for myself. If Leah were real, then she'd understand what he was building, understood it better than anyone. And maybe, just maybe, she'd warned him. The phrase, the cage, was quickly associated with the hidden chamber found behind Ethan's wall safe. The biometric vault. The airlocked steel room with no exit. He had designed it, tested it, and sealed himself inside. He had left no notes, no manual, no fail-safe. Only that sentence. And then, I swear I heard her breathing on the other side. That line fractured the theory, because until that moment, most assumed Ethan had sealed himself alone, voluntarily, or under some compulsion of mental deterioration. But this line, this idea that he wasn't alone, that he'd heard someone, reopened the possibility that Leah wasn't a ghost from the past. She might have still been inside the building, behind a wall, a floor, somewhere he couldn't reach. Acoustic analysis was inconclusive. The breathing wasn't captured. If it had happened at all, it was below the microphone's threshold. But investigators couldn't ignore the fact that Ethan, paranoid, analytical, exacting Ethan, had marked that audio as his final entry. Out of 6 hours of capture, it was the only moment he chose to record directly into the mic, with purpose, with urgency. Psychological profiling considered another angle: shared delusion. Ethan and Leah may have developed a folie à deux, a mutual psychosis, driven by isolation and cryptographic obsession. In that context, the cage wasn't just steel and bolts. It was a belief, a system of logic they both participated in. And maybe, when Ethan locked himself inside, he expected Leah to follow, or release him, or prove something neither of them could say out loud. But Leah never surfaced, and after the final access to the safe room, no additional biometric scans were recorded. Whoever opened the vault door had either been Ethan or someone with his fingerprint. No cameras captured the moment. The building systems logged nothing. Investigators issued a renewed call for information about Leah Rayner, including updated sketches, digital composites, and voice descriptions. Nothing came back. No hits on facial recognition, no DMV records, no financial activity, no immigration trace. She remained what she always had been, a name on a lease and a fading memory in someone else's story. But the glovebox drive changed something. It shifted the investigation from a story of one man's collapse to something wider, more entangled. Someone else had been close enough to Ethan to understand the nature of the chamber, close enough to warn him, and close enough, maybe, to stand just beyond that steel wall, breathing. Whoever she was, Ethan believed she was real. And in the end, maybe that belief was the only thing that kept him company inside the cage he built himself. At first, no one noticed the detail. It sat buried in a maintenance report, flagged only after the building's engineering logs were pulled again, weeks after the hidden chamber was discovered. A technician reviewing the Smart Vault's authentication history noticed something strange. The biometric scan that had triggered the vault's release, the one that opened the sealed steel door in August 2025, was a match. Not just a close match, a perfect one. It wasn't a forged fingerprint or a cloned key or manipulated override. It was Ethan Harrow's fingerprint, his exact ridge pattern, scanned in full with live tissue confirmation. That door had only ever been programmed for Ethan, and the system was air-gapped. No remote override, no digital backdoor, no admin code. When the vault opened, it did so because Ethan had told it to, from the inside. Investigators froze when the realization landed. The airlock chamber had been searched top to bottom. Fingerprints, only Ethan's. DNA, his and only his. The biometric pad was internal. There was no handle on the exterior, no hinges. The only way that door could open was if Ethan Harrow was alive inside it. But he wasn't. There was nobody, no trace. Only the partial tooth, confirmed through DNA as his, and the fingerprints. The oxygen tank was empty, the water bottles drained, the chamber pristine and soundproof. A steel cocoon, not even dust. Nothing suggested a struggle. No hidden hatch, no mechanism of escape. Just a perfect seal and a system designed to wait for one person. And it had waited for 3 years. Theories spiraled. Some thought he had planned it, staged his disappearance and escaped somehow through the building's infrastructure. But engineers dismissed that. The chamber was set in concrete, bordered by other apartments and utilities. Every inch had been accounted for. No crawl space, no passageway. There was simply no way out that didn't involve opening that one door from inside. Others leaned toward suicide, followed by body removal. But how? No signs of forced entry, no tampering, no evidence anyone else had been inside. Besides, who could have moved a full-grown body through a vault with no second exit? The truth became harder to pin down the closer they looked. Psychologists were brought in. They analyzed Ethan's recordings, his behavior in the months leading up to the disappearance, the subdermal mic, the whispered messages, the obsessive design of the vault itself. Their conclusion leaned into breakdown, paranoia, isolation, delusion. That Ethan had suffered a psychotic collapse, that he'd entered the chamber willingly, perhaps even as a test, and then lost himself. But then there was Leah, the woman who may have never existed, who had no birth certificate, no tax record, and no driver's license, whose name only appeared once on a lease document 6 months before Ethan vanished, the one the doorman remembered as quiet, strange, the woman Ethan had referenced in his final whisper. She said, "I built the cage for myself, but I swear I heard her breathing on the other side." If she wasn't real, then who had he been talking to? And if she was, where did she go? Some detectives couldn't let her go. They argued she wasn't a hallucination or a ghost. They believed Leah was real, just deeply hidden, that she had known Ethan's plans, that she may have been complicit, or worse, controlling them. But even those investigators were split, because the things Leah had said, at least in Ethan's words, didn't sound like someone worried about him. They sounded like someone testing him, pushing him deeper. And then there were others, the fringe voices on the case, who wondered aloud if Leah had never been human at all. They pointed to Ethan's language in the Obsidian files, the references to synthetic layers, fallback loops, and biometric logic gates, phrases like red channel and physical imprint bias, concepts that didn't cleanly map to known systems. Ethan had been experimenting in a gray zone between hardware and consciousness, building security around identity in ways no one else was attempting. If Leah had been part of that, some emergent construct or artificial proxy, it could explain the lack of paper trail. But it didn't explain how a synthetic presence could move a body or open a vault. That part, the vault opening, became the center of everything. The forensic team tried to rule out anomalies. Maybe the scanner had degraded, maybe an electrical fault mimicked a scan, but those theories collapsed under testing. The scanner had full liveness detection. It couldn't be fooled. The system reported one thing. Ethan Harrow had opened that vault in real time, after 3 years of silence. But if he was alive enough to open it, where did he go? No security footage showed anyone exiting the building. No neighboring tenants reported strange noises or sightings. The last known place Ethan could have been was the size of a walk-in closet, and after it opened, it was empty. The case was officially closed 6 months later. The ruling cited psychological collapse, voluntary isolation, and presumed death by unknown means. The tooth, officials said, was likely the result of self-injury or decay. The vault, a tragic monument to paranoia and brilliance, twisted inward. It was over. But inside the precinct, the file was marked unsolved, quietly. Because there were too many things that didn't add up, too many dead ends that felt intentionally designed, too many silences where something should have been heard, and one sentence, whispered in the dark, that no one could explain. She said, "I built the cage for myself, but I swear I heard her breathing on the other side. If Leah Ware's real, she would never come forward. If she wasn't, then someone, or something, was still inside that system, still part of Ethan's world. Maybe she didn't need a body, maybe she never had one, but she knew how to wait, and the vault had opened,